Washington voters said yes to a tough new gun law, but at least 13 county sheriffs say no to enforcing it. In November, Washington voters spoke overwhelmingly, passing with nearly 60% of the vote with a sweeping array of new gun regulations. But it turns out voters might not have the last word. And at least 13 mostly rural counties across Washington, from the Pacific coast to the eastern wheat fields, county sheriffs have publicly pledged not to enforce the new law, known as Initiative 1639, citing their personal opposition to it. My job as a sheriff is to throw bad guys in jail, but it's also to protect the constitutional rights of citizens of our country. This is according to Bob Songer, one of the county sheriffs. I follow the rule of law when I believe it's constitutional. Okay, so I guess sheriffs in Gray Harbor, Pacific, Mason, Kittitas, Yakima. All right, you guys see it. We don't need that. Here's the picture of all the places. So let's see exactly what this thing is. All right, so what this measure does, it makes it illegal for anyone under 21 to buy a semi-automatic rifle, the same as it is for handguns. It requires a 10-day waiting period and more thorough background checks for anyone buying those rifles. And if a teenager or someone who can't legally own a gun uses one in a crime, the gun owner could be held responsible if the gun was stored carelessly. Okay, and sheriffs just decided they're not going to enforce this. So here's like a for instance. What if, for instance, a gun shop decides to sell a semi-automatic rifle to a 19-year-old? So here's what one of the sheriffs who says he's not going to enforce this says. I don't think you're going to find any gun shops that are going to sell guns to someone under 21. But if it did happen, we would properly report. We wouldn't arrest anyone. So what if they just substitute guns with booze? I don't think there's anyone that would sell booze to someone under 21. But if they did, we wouldn't arrest. We'd report it. We'd say that it happened. That we think this is against the Constitution. This is where police officers are taking a stand. Imagine if police officers took a stand against against brutalizing peaceful protesters. What if they all stood up and said, this goes against the Constitution. These people have the right to protest. These people have the right to peacefully assemble. We're not gonna be brutal to them. This goes against the Constitution. What if they all stood up for that? What if something like that would have happened at DAPL? Now I know this is a big what if because a lot of those people doing that at DAPL weren't even police officers. They were just contractors. They weren't even actual cops. But isn't it like this is where law enforcement makes a stand? Oh, you're gonna try to crack down on people's ability to get a gun. That's unconstitutional. We're not enforcing that. These gun shop nothing. We don't see any problems here. This is when they really decide to take a stand, to take a subversive stand, and to say we're not going to follow this law. This law is unconstitutional. A law that just makes it more difficult for the wrong people to acquire guns. Hopefully, makes it more difficult for the wrong people to acquire guns. Saying, hey, if you're under 21, you can't get a certain type of gun. Hey, there's going to be a waiting period. There's going to be a more extensive background check. You know, if you're going to distribute guns irresponsibly or illegally or haphazardly, you could have consequence. There will be consequences for you. They decide that that's unconstitutional, and they take a stand. I mean, imagine if they stood up for something else. Imagine if they stood up at the border. Imagine if they said, you know what, this is ridiculous. Imagine if some of the ICE agents that were tasked with going around Arizona and kicking over water that activists left for people crossing the border. Imagine if they said, you know what, this is inhumane, and this is not a good use of our time. This is not there's nothing constructive about this. This is just brutal. We're not doing it. We're not kicking over another thing of water. There's cities in this country where people don't have access to clean water. That's happening in the United States of America. And you want us to kick over water meant for other human beings. We're not doing it. What if people would have stood up there? Instead, this is where you see law enforcement standing up. What if they would have stood up to some of their fellow police officers who are shooting and killing unarmed black people in the streets? This is where they stand up. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and